Hi, I'm Adnan Mahmutovic, and this is Love and Is This Contents podcast. Today I have a really special guest from Canada, Amila Buturovic, who was born in Sarajevo, where she completed her BA in Arabic language and literature at the University of Sarajevo. Now, she came to Canada on the Aga Khan Fellowship to do an MA in Islamic Studies at McGill, where she also did her PhD. Since her appointment at York in the Department of Humanities and Religious Studies in the mid-90s, she has been interested in the cultural history of Ottoman and post-Ottoman Balkans, specifically Bosnia. Now, she was investigating the formations and expressions of Islamic culture in a contextual way, that is, in relation to other religious cultures in the region. She is the author of many scholarly articles, 2 monographs or books. One is entitled Stone Speaker, Bosnian Tombstones, Landscapes, and Identity in the Poetry of Mak Dizdar. Mak Dizdar is a famous classical Bosnian poet. Then there is Carved in Stone, Etched in Memory, Tombstones and Commemoration in Bosnian Islam. She's also co-editor with Irvin Schick of Women in the Ottoman Balkans. Her most recent project focuses on the culture of health and healing in Ottoman Bosnia, specifically in relation to esoteric teachings and occult practices. So it's really exciting, this new road she's taken. Now, as a part of this project, she has teamed up with the National Museum of Bosnia and Herzegovina to research and help curate their collection of artifacts that speaks to the rich and interconfessional heritage of magic and healing in Ottoman Bosnia. Amila, you are welcome to Love and Is This Contents. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. This is really an exciting podcast, so I'm happy to take part.
And I think our subject is extremely exciting. I mean, it's something that I feel, well, like when I first saw your research, when I saw the posts that you had, with these fragments from old texts. Of course, I think most of us kind of geek out when we see those kinds of things, like, oh, she had this privilege of digging into those old archives and finding all kinds of weird and exciting stuff and all that. So I think I've seen a lot of people reacting really positively and with a kind of a hunger for knowledge, seeing your work, and it seemed to me that the notions of spells and potions, love spells and love potions, seems to be like something that's kind of common to most cultures. I would guess that most cultures have some kinds of love spells and potions, as love is a common thing, thing that is something that ties us across these kind of ethnic, national, religious, all kinds of borders. This is a particular part, I think, cultural thing that I feel is something that would interest many. But before we go into that research and what these love spells and potions are, I think we first need to define the main topic, which is love. Why does it even need something like love potions and spells? So what is love?
What is love? Do we have about 3 years for this podcast?
At least. Yeah.
So I would say that it is really quite important to be contextual in this case. I mean, I always like to be contextual in the sense that lots of historical circumstances and cultural circumstances give rise to particular attitude towards the concept that otherwise, as you say, is universal, and we see it in every culture functioning in many different ways, being treated and defined in many different ways. So I think it is very important that we do not impose our understandings onto the texts and objects that we are dealing with, particularly those that are separated from us in time and space. I had worked on the topic of love in my graduate work, in fact, when I was working on Arabic poetry from Spain, from Al-Andalus, and I did my MA on love poetry of Ibn Quzman, a very famous but somewhat neglected Arab poet, who at the time I understood, offered his own take on or his own reworking of the concept of love that had been inherited from the Quranic texts, from the Quranic material to the Islamic tradition, to the more kind of Sufi stuff, and then Udri poetry, which is more of a Platonic style of love. And then when you see that a personal intervention of a poet can actually both synthesize but also create havoc in those inherited notions of love. And that was the first, that first encounter, more serious kind of research encounter, where I accepted that, okay, I cannot really tell him what he means by love. I need to let the text speak to me. And so, which is why maybe, having that kind of micro-historical beginning makes it very hard for me to generalize, and I tend to avoid generalizations, but I can say that in all the different situations I have worked with, there has always been a grappling over something that is extremely elusive on the one hand, but also very certain. So there is in all of these different cases that I've been dealing with, there is both a sense of control and a complete lack of control, of understanding, of knowledge, of feeling, of everything that makes up that concept of love. So when it comes to magic spells, when it comes to actually the occult tradition, this comes to be exemplified, I think, in the richest and the most dynamic and most luminous of ways. Because magic, after all, is a way of both saying there is something that we cannot control, but also there is a desire to control. So when you approach any topic from that perspective, any understanding of human emotion, of human behavior, of the cosmos, of the world, of interpersonal relations in that way, you both admit to your inability to comprehend it all, but also this really strong desire to control it. So the push and pull between knowledge and lack of knowledge, between certainty and uncertainty, between presence of emotion, but the absence of something that fulfills it in a kind of most comprehensive and full, way that makes you relax, is what characterizes these occult practices. And they try to cover really every ground that there is in terms of the expression of love. So it is a sentiment, it's also knowledge, it is also relation, it's also a sense of stability, it's a sense of control, but it's also complete sense of mystery and knowledge that we can never fully control it.
That makes perfect sense. Although it sounds a little bit like madness, which I suppose is connected to love, but it makes perfect sense because we have the idea that, in a sense, we want to understand love. We want to be able, as you say, control it because it is beyond control, and we know that we know that we cannot know it in the most kind of pure rational way. So it seems to me that these practices, these material practices, are, as you said, both a ways of exercising some kind of knowledge, because I suppose, and we'll talk about this, the recipes, for instance, and the spells are very specific. They are controlled, measured, all those things, but they contain a heavy dose of the uncontrollable. So they become like a representation of what love is, the material representation of how we perceive love, as both just incomprehensible but also very well, we know what love is instinctively. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Yes, and I would like just to add one thing that is a kind of that makes the occult practice, esoteric teaching, somewhat different from, say, the idea of even poetic love, even love as expressed in poetry, or love as expressed in Sufi tradition, or love that is expressed in a more sacred kind of religious sense. That for the occult practices, as far as I can see, there is really no boundary. There is no definition of subject and object. Subject and object is a much more open, two much more open entities or concepts than they are in any of these other versions. Because in the other ones, there is more of a formality associated with who you are turning your emotions towards. So there is a sort of formation of the relationship that is more stable. In its instability, it's more stable. You can, as a reader, you can actually follow at some level, follow the logic of the relational logic. Whereas in occult practices and in these esoteric manuals that I've been looking at, you really cannot. You don't. It becomes, for a reader, it becomes extremely hard to categorize, to classify. Yet classification and categorization is necessary, of course, because in order to understand anything, you want to make sense of, group it in some way, and create a certain structure or logic to it that can help you then deconstruct it, if you wish. But in this case, you start with a mess and you end up with a mess, yet there is a certain logic that that is very seductive, because it makes you feel that they know exactly what they are talking about, but you don't know. You don't. I mean, there are certain formula that textually exist where supposedly it works, and they use a particular term there which says tested, and tested not as in not in the experimental sense of modern science, where you through experiment get to a conclusion that is valid, but rather as in it works because others have tried it, so it's experientially tested. So and then others are not. Other recipes are not. So you understand that even they are able to, or they need to, they try to make certain differentiations. So amidst all of that, complication of emotions and expression of emotions and relations and subject-object dynamic when it comes to love sentiments.
That is fascinating. I can see these scenes and trials and errors and in a sense honing the skills and craft over generations and generations, and I want to ask you a little bit in a moment about how they work. But before that, I was thinking, if you could tell us what kinds of spells and recipes have you found, and what are people specifically after? Like with these, what do they specifically want?
So very often they include within the category of love, particularly in the esoteric manuals. So I'm talking here about two different types of sources, and let me just emphasize that there are the talismans and the amulets, and I'm particularly working on the talismans. There are the talismans which are examples of material culture. They are objects which are used ritually, which are used as part of one's expression of faith in the working of this talisman. So the talismans are material objects, and they have their own, in a way, logic, and they have their own historicity, and so they need to be understood on their own terms. And then there are the manuals, the esoteric manuals, grimoires, and various kinds of esoteric sources, which are part of a broader written tradition, and which are a sort of cumulative knowledge that has been passed on through not just generations, but through different kinds of cultural encyclopedia that can be traced back to, ancient Hellenic cultures, to the ancient Persian world, to early Arabic texts, to ancient Indian tradition. So there is a kind of transmission of accumulation of that knowledge, which then is processed in specific historical moments and contexts, one of them being Ottoman Bosnia. So when all that knowledge arrived in Ottoman Bosnia, when it was accumulated in Ottoman Bosnia, it sort of met up with the existing local tradition and ritual practices, which had already been quite rich and quite also diverse and eclectic, because they involved some of local Slavic customs, from the Byzantine tradition, from the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox tradition, from the Catholic tradition, Franciscan tradition, and so on and so forth. So there is lots of meeting within Bosnia of the different ideas and the different categorizations and different mores and different ingredients and different types of knowledge, different languages. So all of that, in fact, makes it extremely rich, not just to see how history works, but also how it is reworked, how it is absorbed and then put back into practice. Knowledge is absorbed and then given as in form of a talisman. So what I'm observing here is, in fact, a rather not just eclectic, but also open-minded, if you wish, set of propositions as to what we need to solve in our lives. And everybody's, has in some ways has given us, or any of these talismans and these esoteric manuals, they have given us insight into the complexity of life situations. This is about life, really, and love is part of that life. And sometimes, just as we do it now, we confuse love with other things. So we have this anxiety in us, which we think is because of some love, but then we go to a therapist and he says, well, no, think about why you would be anxious, and then you learn how to, in fact, dissociate, or how to learn that love can trigger certain other emotions. And in these pre-modern manuals and these pre-modern talismans, this is already there instinctively, not necessarily as systematically in terms of contemporary psychoanalysis and psychotherapy, but rather it is there almost intuitively posed as something that you can benefit from if you think of resolving, say, a issue with where it says it's a love potion, but in fact you see it is in fact it's something else that we would classify something else now. For example, we would classify it as marital, as infertility, issues around childbirth.
That's right. For example. I see that. Yes, good.
Or issues around well-being, the household well-being, issues around family. Or family values, as it were, family relationships. How to have a better marriage by having your children, healthy, for example. So you see, all that comes under these categories of love. Muhabbetici, for example, it says this is a spell for love, and then it says, well, it's about really making your children eat better.
Oh, that's lovely.
As if this will now resolve your marital situation, or how to use sex for particular ends, for political ends, for example. Or if you need to to seduce your commander in the army, or if you need to make sure that your wife, that your future wife will bring a bigger dowry, what you do. So things like this, or your in-laws, or your outlaws, it's all these different relations that we don't necessarily classify as love, but in the material that I'm working with, amazingly, it all goes under the category of love. So, from anything from really heartbreak and heartache to marital relations, to same-sex desires, to lust, both within illicit relationships and outside of those relationships. There is a recipe for everything. So those who were putting together those recipes and who relied on this long tradition of, how to control positive forces, how to control, how to bring together the particularly ruhaniyat, the celestial spirits, to help you with your problem, they don't really they don't censor anything. They respond, and they don't censor. So, and because of that, we have a much richer and broader reflection of how people have gone about their lives and their challenges, that involve other people, sometimes other beings, because there is also love vis-a-vis the jinn, sometimes vis-a-vis the animals, sometimes
right, yes.
vis-a-vis, in imagine what you imagine, in your imagination, love towards somebody that you imagine. So all ranges are there.
Oh, that is amazing, because it really shows that there is no kind of reductive approach to love. Love is pretty much everything. It's not just a feeling. It's not simply that, as you said, connected to desiring someone in particular, and then maybe heartbreak, healing the heartbreak, but or wanting someone to love you, to make someone love you in a sense, or mending your heart. But I love all these practicalities that you mentioned, because they very much show how people conceive the love operates. That love is not just something that takes you out of the world, but is a part of everyday life. And how, if your everyday life doesn't function, I love this example of having your kids eat better, because all of us who are parents, we can, I think, very much relate to that.
Yes.
Like when the kids are not eating, there is a huge worry in the family, and that causes a number of problems, just generally worry, and then you cannot relax with your partner, for instance, and
Exactly.
all that. So one thing is connected to another. It's love is not divorced from other things, some kind of magically, right?
Exactly, that's exactly it. And I think that needs to be put in the context of pre-modern notion of health and
Yes.
well-being, which is what we would now call integrative health, rather than the kind of what the modern medicine, of course, has advanced, which is the way in the kind of more pathological approach in which we are, and more modular approach in which you can separately treat one thing over another. You focus on liver, but you forget about other parts of your body. Whereas in pre-modern medicine, this is all constantly related, and one part of the body cannot be healed if other parts of the body are not addressed, and that comes with the environment. So you need to be healed within a particular environment, within certain astral correspondences. You cannot heal your, if you have liver issues, Venus has to be in a particular position. You cannot heal if there is no sympathy. It's this idea, this theory of sympathies and antipathies that focuses also on issues of health, so that certain constellations and certain astral moments are in fact more auspicious for healing certain challenges, and emotions are part of that. So so we have, in Bosnian tradition, sevdalinka, sevda is the black bile. It's part of that idea of pre-modern medicine of the four humors, that being associated with passion and with madness and melancholy and emotions, the kind of dark side of the emotions, that also needs to be treated in a similar way. In other words, in connection with other aspects of the body. So in that sense, it is, as you say, it's not reductive and it's not fragmented. So there is no fragmentation of a human experience. So you can be, you can be in battle and still battle with emotions. So so it's not that you are, just because you are in the battlefield, that you are not somehow, that you can cut off your emotional woes if you have any. So they're trying to, there are recipes, for soldiers, love potions for soldiers. So, so clearly, these soldiers are not, they're not going into the battlefield to find love. They're going to battlefield to do battles, to behave as soldiers. But they need to address their the love side that might be, leaving behind or not having, or feeling the absence of, and feeling depression towards. They don't use the word depression, but they definitely, Sauda is part of that, the vocabulary. So, and what's interesting is how easily, and one can ascribe this to to the messiness of these and disorganization of these manuscripts, which is initially what I thought. You work your way through it, and they just throw in topics. They throw in topics. There is no, chapter 1 on this, chapter 2 on this. No, they just throw in. So you have to go through the whole text. Sometimes these texts are 200 pages long or 300 pages long, and you find the scattering of these these potions and these recipes all over the place. And it starts with saying, okay, if you have excessive, in one of the cases, if you have excessive earwax, this is what you do. And then it finishes the recipe, and then it says, and if your wife is not performing sexually, so it just sort of jumps from topic to topic. So
from earwax to sexual performance.
So, exactly. So there's no. There is a sense that everything is equally important. You see what I mean? So when it comes to well-being, so there is no ordering. There is no hierarchy of presentation. There is a certain order. Sometimes the order is based on what I found to be the organizing, sometimes logic, is around particular types of talismans. So whether it is talismans to be fumigated, to be burnt, or talismans to be diluted in water, or it is talismans that use particular, for example, surah from the Quran, and then sometimes they are about sexual prowess, and then there is lots of sex, and then it moves on to high fever, and then it comes back to if you want somebody to be madly thinking only about you. And this is interesting. They don't use the word that they are in love with you, but that they are kind of sometimes obsessed with it. They only can think of you. Or
so you want to make someone think of you constantly.
Think of you constantly.
Oh wow! Okay.
And then it says, and then there is gendering, which is very important. There are talismans, recipes addressed to women, recipes addressed to men, and they are never confused.
They're never confused.
They are never confused, and this is very important. That there is a certain attitude towards, or a certain assumption that men and women do not process emotions in the same way.
Oh, I see. That's
or they
really
don't process these challenges in the same way. This is, of course, in modern medicine. It's only recently that we have started to see sort of gendered application of medication and the recognition that there might be a difference in the way in which but this is in pre-modern medicine, in pre-modern medical theories, this was acknowledged, this was part of the theories, and it is reflected in these love talismans. So,
and is the difference mainly like in terms of so I suppose it has to do with diagnostics, that you diagnose it differently. So in practice, is it about let's say in a recipe you use different ingredients, in talismans, spells that you use different formulas, or
yes. So so it says, for example, if a woman wants her husband to think only of her when he's gone on a trip, you use this amount of, and then there are various ingredients. So this proportion, and then you use this magic formula and this ayah. So then this is all written down, and then there are specific instructions what to do with that type of talisman. And then you see a list of ingredients for example, in these recipes that are addressed to women, that repeatedly include certain ingredients, particularly botanical ingredients, plants, but they don't appear in male talismans. So there is, for example, something called Sarahalile and Karahalile. These are two. It's a plant that we don't have in Bosnia, but it was nevertheless common in the Ottoman lands, particularly in Eastern Ottoman lands. It's a plant that comes from South Asia, actually, and Karahalile is in love potions. Is never used, for example, for women. Only for men. Only in recipes addressed to men you can have Karahalile, but not Sarahalile. Sarahalile, yellow halile, yellow and black halile. So yellow halile is used for women, the black one is used for men. And then it's, so you see, but then you see both of them used in other recipes, in other types of healing, intentions. So how this comes about, again, is cumulative knowledge. Whether this is part of one aspect of my research is to connect the pharmacopoeia, the Ottoman pharmacopoeia, the whole the body of material that is associated with pharmaceutics, botanical pharmaceutics, to see actually how much connection there is between the plants that have been used medicinally in the Ottoman Empire. Again, this is something that comes out of many different heritages: Greek, South Asian, Persian, and Arabic. Particularly from, of course, De Materia Medica, from Dioscurides' work that circulated within the Arab land, that was translated into Arabic, that was then translated also into Ottoman Turkish, and that we have copies of in Bosnia as well. So looking at, seeing how, whether these herbs and plants appear with what kind of potency and what kind of function and use they appear in the so-called mainstream pharmaceutical practice versus occult practice. So I've seen some connections there. It's a long and arduous research because, of course, I go plant by plant, and some plants appear in the occult but not appear in the pharmacopoeia, in the mainstream photography. So there is a bit of a difference, but there is a certain logic, and then also there is no logic. So, for example, I have a pepper, black pepper, which is used, a lot for bronchial issues, for cold, basically common, what we would say common cold, gains this new property, the occult property, and these are called, by the way, khawas, the special property, which are properties that are regulated not through their botanical properties, but through their celestial connections. So the Ruhaniyat are in charge of these plants in the occult practice. You see, so these are the so-called the khawas. The khawas is a term that is there, part of the esoteric and occult tradition. It's a kind of special property of something, a special property of it can be of a plant or of anything else, of some kind of an entity, or a planet for that matter. But in this case, I have a whole treatise called Khawasul Fulful, the special properties of black pepper, in which you see all this kind of bronchial benefit from the pepper is absent, and there is now sexual benefit from the pepper, black pepper. But it works in opposite ways for men and women. For men, it enhances male sexuality, so male desire, it enhances it, and for women, it decreases female sexuality.
It decreases female sexuality?
In one case, it increases it, in the other case, it decreases it.
Oh, wow, that's the difference. Yeah.
So the difference is then when you use it in a spell intended for a man, then you use it so as to enhance male performance, sexual performance. But if the husband who wants the wife not to be too sexually curious, they will use it in the recipe for women to decrease her sexual
Oh, wow.
desire.
So it's like a taming of the sexual desire.
It's like taming of the yes. So there are these different... Now, I must say that this is not necessarily consistent, that in some other manuals this will be perhaps differently. But I'm trying to work with the material that we have in Bosnia so as to create this connection between written culture, the instructions. It's like going to IKEA and having the manual how to build the thing. So I want to see how this talisman comes about, and who so looking at the material, looking at the material evidence, the talisman itself, the object itself, and then linking it to the written culture, to the knowledge that is being transmitted, and where that knowledge is, in fact, where it originates and how it is transferred, how it is exchanged, what happens when we talk about ingredients that don't exist locally. There is a whole principle of, there is a whole very carefully designed and commitment to find adequate replacement, or if there is no replacement, to keep the original recipe. So, such as in the case of Sara Halile and Kara Halile, which don't exist in Bosnia.
Yeah, I was really fascinated by that, where you said that the recipes don't change. So you don't adapt the recipe in that you alter it. Rather, you keep the recipe, but practically you find replacements for certain ingredients.
Yes, but that will be indicated. That will be indicated.
I see. Okay, so it's but that's a wonderful way of kind of keeping the sense of the trajectory of the recipe, this kind of history of it, where it comes from. So it's not adaptation simply in changing, in kind of appropriating it to the local setting, culture, all these things. So you want to keep the history of it. You honor that kind of the origin of where it comes, because there seems to me almost as if there is a part of the spell is in the fact that it has a history, that it has the weight of the history, that it's been tried in other places, that it comes from these sages or these wise people from other cultures. So it's not like it's over there, that's bad because that's other culture. Rather, you build upon that.
You build upon it. In fact, most of these recipes are a beautiful testimony to that accumulation of knowledge and transfer of knowledge, and the meeting of cultures, and the trajectories through which this knowledge circulates as it circulates now, but we don't, when we think about pre-modern period, we think really in more disconnected terms. And these traditions that were not censored, as it were, in the same way in which something that is closer to a more mainstream political or theological or social, institutional life, they actually reflect really a history of lots of intimacy on the one hand, social intimacy, but also a lot of openness, but also curiosity, as well as enough sense of originality to sort of intervene when intervention is needed. And here, from the academic sort of perspective, I like to use what the Cuban anthropologist Oritz referred to as transculturation. So, kind of meeting of cultures in which it's not acculturation. It's not just sort of one culture kind of moving into the other or replacing the other, but rather they're coming together, and then some things stay, some things disappear. So it's a way of negotiating cultural material that is new material that comes into a context in which existing practices, of course, resist change. So they adjust. They adjust. So if you don't have if you don't have a particular kind of nut in your botanical repertoire, you use the nut that you think is closest to the one that is being suggested. And now, why that is chosen as opposed to other nuts, why walnut is closer to pecan as opposed to hazelnut, is a matter of then explanation. And some of these recipes will explain that, or the explanation will be found in the botanical manuals, where it will say, a black, for example, black walnut is good for a recipe where pine nut is, if pine nut is absent.
Yes. So some kind of this is a combination of things that kind of produces the effect. But I assume there is also a desire with these recipes, that there is a desire to also acquire the original ingredients, and so that they travel as well, either as merchandise or as import, but also maybe to try and plant those things locally.
Yes, certainly. I mean, that is, I think, a very important aspect to the kind of the agricultural dimension of it. And we do have in the history of the occult a very important early manual, which is known as a kind of manual for agricultural sector, which is also then enters into the Islamic esoteric tradition and occult tradition. Because of this idea that it is all interconnected. What we eat is what ultimately affects how we behave, and also is related to how then life, the cycle of life, the harvest cycle, and in Bosnia and all over the Balkans, the old Slavic tradition of harvest tradition and harvest season is very important, and so much of generally of the calendar, sacred calendar, and life cycle is associated with agricultural calendar. In fact, the period of harvest, the period of many of the sacred months are in fact connected to that. So all of this is in fact related, sometimes not directly but indirectly, and I think in part because of this sort of rich attitude towards and complex attitude towards nature, which in the Balkans is harsh. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's very harsh. it's seasons are very winter is harsh, and food is scarce in winter, and local practices have adjusted to this, and I think they have also embraced this idea that what you see growing in nature not only helps you nourish the body, but also can help you in fact control some of the more hidden sort of aspects of your life and your well-being. How calm you are, or how sad you are, or how happy you are, and things like that.
Yeah, all those. That's so fascinating. I'm just thinking, like growing up, I think we Bosnians are kind of conservative with, for instance, spices. It seems to me that we all kind of have an aversion to spices. So it's salt and pepper. So now pepper is explained to me like this is why we Bosnians love pepper. So it's good. I'm good.
And by the way, in my pre-modern, in these Ottoman manuals, we had much more dynamic relationships with many of the things that we don't anymore, such as ginger, such as saffron, such as turmeric. All of that was actually locally produced and locally grown, and many recipes involve ginger, the combination of ginger, honey, and turmeric and cinnamon. Cinnamon is very common in love potions, as well as in health, other health issues, bodily, as anti-inflammatory things. So when you have sore throat, or you have a sore on a sore wound, you use cinnamon. So these ingredients were in fact readily available, more than they are now. In fact, much more than many of them are now.
That I find really, in a sense, weird, and so I don't know what the cause of that is. I mean, for instance, here in Sweden, we love cinnamon. It's huge, and I'm thinking that a number of these things that you mentioned, cinnamon, clove, I suppose is used in Bosnia. I mean, I remember that growing up. I heard recently, in fact, that because ginger, I think, is mentioned in the Quran as being an ingredient in these paradisal drinks. And someone told me, I've never really thought about this, but someone told me that's because you need potency. So that was really funny, I have to say. But there are these. I mean, for instance, I don't remember ginger growing up, for instance, those kinds of things. Yes. But clove I do. Of course, coffee, pepper, and some of these things. But things like saffron, anise, musk, those kinds of things, perhaps not so much.
Yet they abound in these recipes.
And they
are not replaced. Yeah. So they're used without replacement, and because of the sheer amount of these recipes and the sheer amount of the possibilities, the variations of the recipe show that in fact it was available. It was readily available.
That's wonderful, and that's a whole different kind of knowledge, because it really shows, I think, through. As you say, because they didn't change recipes, and then they had these annotations like how they could be substituted, that you can see what they needed and what they did not need, what they had plenty of.
Yes. And one thing that I would like to emphasize here is, again, the importance of local economy and the participants in local economy. So these recipes, of course, required access to some of the goods that were imported, that were not locally grown. And in other words, we see that also, by the way, in herbals that are produced by the Franciscans in the region, who were the healers as well. But they didn't necessarily write love spells. They were giving recipes which when you read them are much more locally familiar. Lots of cabbage, for example, lots of kale, and greens that we see everywhere in Bosnia, wherever you go. These more the so-called Oriental spices that came from the Middle East and Far East, and from, in other words, through trading routes, were listed in the local atars, the local herb apothecaries, and the most important apothecaries in Bosnia were run by the Sephardic Jews. So you have here, a lovely sort of testimony to how local economy had these cross-confessional, interconfessional dimensions, how that knowledge was shared. Some of it, was also parceled, in the sense that the apothecaries that we have in the Sephardic apothecaries, and some of the lists of the ingredients that we have from the later periods, not necessarily from early Ottoman period, nevertheless from the later periods, still show that Sephardic cuisine used its own spices, but also some of these were clearly sold to not just they were not only there for Sephardic community, but were there for everybody in the charshia, everybody in the market, as well as for the doctors, for medical treatments. So you have the kind of transsectoral and transconfessional, as well as transregional exchange of knowledge and exchange of practice. So one thing that I really would like to draw attention to in my work is that this is not, popular practices that we tend to think of, this kind of, something in the shadows of social norms, the shadows of social practices, something that just people do in the lower spheres of cultural and social, but it's not. It is really something that has many different dimensions. It goes from the wealthiest members of society to the poorest, from the most sort of politically and socially eminent to the riffraff. So it cuts through different classes, genders, religions, rural. It sort of defies these simple boundaries and simple categories that we work with, city, village, urban, suburban, or rural, rich, poor, man, woman, and so on and so forth.
I think that's this kind of openness that you've been describing, this kind of flow movement of these things that are exemplified through that. I mean, whether or not we appreciate these practices any longer, I mean, whatever we think of them now, but what you're describing is the way kind of a society works, and how because what I was wondering, of course, was like once something comes from another culture, like these recipes, for instance, and then they meet with the local cultures where there would be, of course, similar practices from before, right? So different traditions merge. They 1 + 1 becomes 3. So they become kind of much richer, and then this accessibility. So I was wondering, like, because offhand, I would say that if I find a recipe and it has these, let's say, exotic ingredients, I would naturally, it seems that it goes with the territory, that you naturally think that it's that exotic thing which is the spell, which delivers, like, so the exoticism of it, but that's just a local ingredients over there. So this kind of understanding that it's not the exoticism of it, so we can use cabbage, which I think is hilarious. I think people make fun of me because I post these pictures of eating cabbage. I love cabbage, not as an aphrodisiac. I didn't know that it worked that way, if it had any applications. But what I mean is that those are not the assumptions that you have to have saffron, otherwise it's not going to work. You can have something very, very local, mundane, and also this the sense that you say that it's cross-conventional, that it's not bound to one religion or village, rural or urban space. There's something fascinating about that. So, I don't know. I mean, it's just I'm imagining this this flow of energy, kind of this kind of sense that we need healing, and this is something that we have in common. We have certain problems in common, and how do we approach them? So, in a sense, there is a great demand for all kinds of things. So the king, the sultan has the same needs as a peasant. If he can't perform, the wife will be pissed, and they need to do something about that anyway. But I'm wondering about the supply. You mentioned the Sephardic apothecaries, but I'm wondering, of course, if there is a need, there is a supply. So I suppose we established where the need comes from, but who are the suppliers? Who are the people that you trust to deliver the proper stuff, rather than like in any trade, there's always the specialist, there's always there's always the good stuff and the bad stuff, right? Who were those who provided these services? And
trade was a very dynamic and sort of rich sector of life in the Ottoman Empire. And these empires, the pre-modern empires, as opposed to contemporary, either the kind of colonial realms or modern, of course, nation states. When you were part of the empire, you could move around. You didn't have passports to go from. You didn't need to worry about traversing large geographies so as to reach certain ingredients. So trade was actually it was a bustling market, and we have it not just, of course, within the empire, but also across the empire. We know that lots of Bosnian traders were both, we find records of them in as east as Basra, and then as west as Venice. So and Sarajevo was part of the trading route, as were many other towns in the region. So the supply was not so much of an issue. It was more a question of how it was distributed. Who were the authorities? Who were, that's what I mean. Gathering this? Who were using and dispensing these kinds of spells or these kinds of recipes? And that is
what is like the figure that that has a function in a society that can produce spells, that can produce recipes. That is it like you have a recipe and then you just get the ingredients and you do it yourself, or do you have to have like an expert who does it?
Yeah, you never do it yourself. You would.
That's
never
right.
Do it yourself.
Exactly.
No,
yes.
No.
Yeah.
You need to, because the recipe is not just about the ingredients. It is alchemy. It is not. Just again, it is if you want to heal your throat, okay, but if you want to evoke the khawas, the special property, not just the botanical property, but the special property, then you need somebody who is connected with the spiritual realm, somebody who is knowledgeable about how to evoke the astral correspondences, how to work in auspicious times, how to ritually, because a talisman is a ritual object. It's not just a set of writings. It is a ritual object, and in order to be a ritual object, it needs to be ritually produced, and it needs to be ritually performed or used to have any kind of effect. And that, of course, requires knowledge. And usually, there were religious authorities who were sometimes the imams, who had this sort of also extra training. And most of the time after the 17th century, we know that from the history of esotericism, it's really the Sufi experts, sort of Sufi authorities, Sufi sheikhs or Sufis who had who add the element of mystical teaching, of Batini teaching, of esoteric teaching to the performance of the spell, to the composition of the spell. So they know exactly which surah, which ayah to use, to combine, which particularly then also in this period, which of the sifat, of the 99 sifat of God to use in which particular realm. Then also in the mathematical, usually there is a vefk or a magic circle, magic sort of square or circle. So magic square has a particular combination of numbers, because this is alphanumerological at this point, where where the Quranic text is particularly the sifat is associated with numerical value, and that is then translated into a magic circle and the magic square, and the magic square then brings together all these different translates the different realms of the cosmic correspondences, of cosmic connections, into the numbers which are captured in the spell, which are captured in the talisman, and then ritually performed. So ritually used. So that's where this, for example, the plants come in. You either burn the cinnamon together with the pepper, so as to activate what the talisman contains, or you dilute it. You use saffron to write with it. You use rose water to sprinkle on it to make it. So you see, so there is. It's not just the ingredient by itself. It's ingredient in combination with the magical formula, with the text, with these khawas, with the spiritual entities who are summoned, so as to make the spell work. And sometimes, of course, it is they are very complex. Sometimes they are rather simple. So it depends a little bit on the expertise. I mean, this is also quite uneven. I've come across really complex material in the most banal of places, if you wish, in the most unexpected, not in libraries or big sort of centers of learning, but rather in totally unassuming either Sufi lodges or religious centers that they didn't even know what they had.
It insists, I mean, that of course the higher the task, or the tougher the goal is, the more of these skills you need to kind of employ. You need to kind of take draw on more kinds of complex knowledge, and of course that requires a lot of expertise, which is what I want to ask you about. Of course, like in history, we will always have just as now, there are proper doctors and there are quacks. Right. So I assume that even in with regard to these kinds of spells and talismans and potions, all these things. Well, before I go there, I just want to say that it seemed to me that what you just described shows that it's not easy to distinguish necessarily between spells and potions, because especially for those like bigger tasks, they are like one thing. You can't say like one is just purely linguistic or whatever, the other is material. Like they go hand in hand. They need to kind of work together. But what I'm wondering is, did you encounter cases where they recorded, for instance, people misusing these, that they have used them for, like, from what you've been describing, it's usually for health and good, some kind of benefit, right? But traditionally, I'm sure there is, because we have the notion of like white and black magic, right? And is black magic then different, or is it like the misuse or deliberate kind of evil use of these kinds of things? And how was that kind of traditionally kind of recorded and treated, looked upon? How did people distinguish between the two?
Well, we certainly have, in the course of all religious traditions, including Islamic tradition, with which I'm mainly working, a rather long discursive or long tradition of discourse against or for magic, and with some prominent scholars opposing it, with some sort of being indifferent towards it, and with some secretly actually using it or acknowledging that it can be, they can work. Within the medical tradition, likewise, I mean, we have, medical authorities like even Sina, who says you can't use magic. It's wrong to use magic. To saying, to then you realize that actually some of his own botanical stuff actually is what later on becomes, in fact, the basis for magic practice. So there is a range of possibilities, a range of responses, and a very sort of, yes, volatile relationship towards magic. I think now there is much more of a sort of clear desire to exclude magic, because partly I think that has to do with modernity, not just with theology. It's this idea that the modern, in the modern world, we don't need magic, but actually we know that that is not the case, that there is still, the magic practices are everywhere and very sort of very common and very richly present, and many different expressions. But we somehow we push them into the fringes, and we think of them as something that that only we do it only for fun, or only uneducated people do. This is not the case, of course, in the period that I'm working with. What I can say, and even though I do know of the theories, of the discussions, debates about whether magic is licit or illicit, we are dealing actually with a very sort of unclear territory. First of all, the question is, what are we talking about? What term are we dealing with? What terms are we dealing with? And this is one of the big questions that every time there is a gathering, academic gathering, academic conference of any kind, forum of people who work with this, we grapple with the question of what term are we? Is the word magic appropriate? Is the word occult appropriate? Is any of these? All of these terms seem to be rather laden and with some meaning, but they don't really explain what we are working with. So I would say so let me go back to what I am encountering in the sources. What I'm encountering is really not. I'm yet to find a spell that is what we would call black magic, to bring harm. Most recipes and most talismans that I'm working with, I have seen hundreds of talismans, and I have seen dozens of manuals, are about protection against magic. So it is. So if in the word sihr is used as a kind of, yeah. So it is. But it is against sihr. So who it is that performs sihr, I don't know. But this is used to protect against the sihr. You see, so it's protective. It's a apotropaic. It's meant to bring a shield against abuse of magic, or misuse of these forces. So I think that that's very important in a way to see as a practice, that people are aware or are afraid of something that they don't, of the unknown. That unknown can be malevolent, it can be benevolent. We don't know. But the spells are really against either possibilities. So there is an assumption that you can find sihr. And so there are places where you will find sihr. There are situations where you will find sihr. But who casts that spell? Who casts black magic is not clarified. It's not clear. It is some boogeyman out there. Exactly, somebody out there who does this, and I need to protect myself against it. So the spells that I'm working with are in that sense protective. They are not meant to harm. They are meant to protect. And so in terms of the discussion about this, they don't really, in that sense, they don't elucidate more. They tell me is that there is an awareness of black magic, of what we would call black magic, but there is no practice of black magic in the material time.
In the materials, that's that's what I find fascinating. If it's some kind of that kind of black occult knowledge, or that kind of practice, if it's hidden, how is it hidden? How are those materials, recipes, practices kind of transferred, and who does them? And I mean, in every culture, it's usually kind of somehow people identify, okay, well, that's a person who produces sihr, black magic or whatever, and then these are the kind of counter spells or counter potions and so on, the protective ones.
Protective, but also, if I can add, I mean,
Yes.
there are the protective, but there are also these more proactive ones in which actually you
yes.
bring you bring about a good outcome of a situation in which now there is what's important to acknowledge also is that there is many spells are also dealing with the jinn, with the presence of the jinn, and the jinn
yes.
are the ones who are a bit out of control. You know, you don't know whether they will act in your favor or opposite, you know, or they will bring you harm. So so in that sense, you need to deal with the jinn, and then sometimes that also means that you are expecting a bad thing to happen, or when you see that something bad has happened, particularly in your health, then you ascribe it to the jinn. So it's the jinn who are doing it. But it's not, the jinn are not necessarily, that's not necessarily referred to as that they are doing sihr on you. But they are it's just that they are possessing you in a way that you don't want. I mean, they're doing something on you that brings you harm, but they're not necessarily performing sihr. You see what I mean?
That's right, yes.
So
they don't need to be kind of caused by a sihirbaz or someone
exactly.
like that.
It's just that they have certain power over us that we cannot predict, and that we need to make sure that when we are dealing with situations with the etiologies which are associated with the jinn, that we do it really carefully, because we don't want to piss jinn off.
I see.
And they can be very easily pissed off, and they can, yes. And so lots of rituals actually speak about this. Make sure that you don't, when you are dealing with the jinn, that what kind of words you use, what kind of outfits you use, who you seek help from. For example, often this is where children are brought in, like they say, to talk to the jinn, you can't be a tall man. You need to bring, if you're a tall person, you can't talk to the jinn. You need to bring a child who will speak on your behalf. So you will as a kind of intermediary who will communicate to the jinn, because the jinn will be scared of you, and they will then react negatively. They will think you are trying to dominate them. So so there are all these that's yet another realm of activity where I don't find that so much in the reference to love, because funnily the jinn are not, even though we have a tradition of the Majnun.
That's
and
right.
Majnun Layla, you know, somebody who is possessed by the jinn, who is so much in love. In my spells, I don't have a reference to the jinn when it comes to love.
I was so curious about that, because that seemed to me is well, the word itself, as you say, Majnun, comes like someone obsessed, possessed by a jinn, and in common lingo it means mad, right? So to be mad, means to be possessed, in a sense, to not be yourself. So be outside of yourself, which is a kind of a common definition of love, that it's ecstatic. That means that it kind of throws you out of yourself, that you are not yourself when you are in love, so it's I feel it's kind of a natural explanation in most cultures, what this kind of connection between love and madness, and what love does to you. So love makes you mad. It possesses you the way a kind of a foreign creature would, or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I don't. Again, I was specifically looking for this, precisely because of that tradition, and because of the Majnun Layla tradition, and the whole issue around the poet, the poets being Majnun in the early Islamic and pre-Islamic times. So the jinn as the inspiration, of course, in that case, or jinn as a possession in the case of Majnun Layla, as a kind of a possession of the emotions. But in the recipes that I'm in, when it comes to dealing with love, there is no jinn mentioned.
That is amazing. I
jinn
expected you would find loads.
Yeah, you will find. I will find the jinn in health issues. That certain
in health.
Certainly. So there is a certain mental. Yes, there is association with mental disturbances with the jinn, but not just the mental disturbances, but also certain bodily disturbances. If you have what we would now refer to as irritable bowel syndrome, IBS. Actually, it is that usually that etiology is associated with the jinn. That the jinn have make you make you not digest the food properly, and certain things like that. But when it comes to love relations, etc., and making you feel that you are, you want to when it is unrequited love, or when it's not, there's no jinn, I haven't found the jinn yet. Again, it might be somewhere, but I still haven't encountered.
But you haven't found it. Yeah,
and this is what I thought I would find right away, but I haven't found it yet.
And that's why I was curious about and I was wondering if it had to do with because at one point you talk about this kind of disconnect between the inherited occult practices in everyday life and the highly kind of sophisticated, these esoteric treatises that you have found. So I was expecting that maybe there would be, that you would find it somewhere there, that someone has somehow recorded it, or how, let's say, if making someone fall in love with you is done with the help of a jinn, or some other way, that would be there, at least maybe in the remedy, that it's indicated, okay, if you are possessed. But I mean, nowadays what I've seen after the war, for me, I think this is an interesting development. I've seen a lot of this spread of the idea that everyone is under a spell, that the people have been exposed to sihr, to black magic to a greater extent than ever. So you have these people, these traveling ruqya exorcists, people who either recite the Quran, or but what they also do is some of the things that you've mentioned, like maybe taking an ayah or something and then maybe diluting it in water, and then you have to drink that water, or they recite on the water, and like lots of different kinds of practices. And they often speak of like the jinn, like the possession, and love and madness and those kinds of things. But it seems to me like, where does it come from? Like and if it's not traditionally that way, yeah.
Yeah, well, I must say clearly there is some connection, there is some continuity there, but there is also some New Ageism involved.
New Ageism, yes. I agree.
And New Ageism comes in many different formations, and I would say that without downplaying it and without downplaying its popularity and its importance, it's not about it's not about being establishing connection with the tradition. It's about using the tradition to address certain contemporary and modern woes. So one does not necessarily place one's teaching in that regard in the matter of continuity, but in the matter of selective and selected section of the tradition, and then reworking it for the. And you see that in every New Age movement, that you recognize certain elements, but you don't necessarily directly connect it with. So it's not in that sense neo-traditionalism. It is New Ageism.
It's New Ageism. I that has always been my sense, especially because in our case with the war and all these kind of ruptures in the continuity with the tradition, exactly that you are kind of, when you're ruptured from where you come from, how the flow of tradition, and and you no longer know what it actually means, so you have this kind of modern interpretation of it, and then you make it up as you go. Like then you start categorizing, then you start analyzing it in a way that is at the same time a combination of a very modern point of view, secular point of view, but also the new needs, of course.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. These are part of the new or modern religions, new religions, new which are product of modern times. They're not a product of tradition. They're product. They're outcomes of modern trends and modern movements. And they're important because they still speak to the fact that people, regardless of the idea that somehow in this kind of teleological discourse of secularism, that we will get to the point in which we will discard religion altogether. We know that this is not happening, and we know that religion is as strong as it has always been, or perhaps even stronger now. And as Derrida puts it, is adieu, goodbye. Does it mean goodbye, or does it mean adieu towards God? So is it adieu to religion? Is adieu to back to God? So kind of post-secular period, and we have lots of religious new movements which speak to the kind of recycling that is happening, and that again does not need to be completely perceived as totally different from what went on in the past. I mean, religions always appear in context of other religious traditions, so they all sort of recycle each other in some ways, and there is a certain continuity, and just because we have inherited them from the ancients doesn't mean that they are more authentic than what people are searching now, even though we like to think that they are more authentic and more somehow true because they have survived to date. But
also they maybe appear again, just as the ingredients, they appear more kind of exotic because they're old.
Yes, exactly, and there are certain they pursue certain questions that we still grapple with. So in other words, they've posed questions that clearly have not been answered, and that that require lots of energy and lots of inspiration. They give us lots of inspiration, and that we still we find value in those questions, even though they are not our questions. They are questions that we have inherited. But the new religions pose different questions. I mean, some of those questions are still there, such as what is the meaning of life and how will I be a better human being. But they pose them from a different vantage point and offer different answers, borrowing some things from the past, but also working with the current social trends and demographic trends, and understanding that that communication is done in different ways. So part of those New Age practices are also practices of occult revivalism, if you wish, that address what people need now rather than what
absolutely. It makes a lot of sense, and especially like when you see some of the people engaged in certain practices, sometimes even visually they want to appear like they come from another age, but they are super modern. In a way, yes.
I mean, they will appeal to authenticity. They will appeal to antiquity as well. They will say, okay, this, so they will insert certain elements that will make them feel that they are perennial.
That's right.
That they are transcendent or transhistorical. But a closer look always reveals very specific historical grounding.
And that's why I love the kind of the way you beautifully show how it was more most egalitarian in the old time, and how the positioning, the modern kind of positioning, is going on right now with these borders, like in terms of identity politics and all that, colors the way it works a lot more. I got curious about the fact that you said that in a lot of these manuals, or that these manuals that you have found are polyglot, that they use multiple languages, and that says something also about the audiences they were speaking to or catering to. Can you just say something about that kind of polyglot element to it? I kind of love that.
Well, there is certainly, of course, in the Ottoman Empire as a construct was a polyglot construct with 3 languages functioning in 3 different realms of public life. There is the Persian, there is the Ottoman Turkish, and there is Arabic, and they come together sometimes in more exciting ways when it's outside of just the realm of administration, of the realm of religious writing, of the realm of literary expression. And the esoteric tradition is one of those realms where actually they coexist, you will find in these manuals that they are used at the same time, appealing to for different reasons, whether it is writing a particular recipe, or it's writing a particular explanation of the recipe, or and so on and so forth. So you'll have the presence of already, of Ottoman Turkish and Arabic and Persian, but then you have other things come in. So in the case of Ottoman Bosnian, I find phrases in Bosnian that are interspersed there, names of ingredients, plants, particularly when they are substituted, names are in Ottoman Bosnian. Then sometimes you find, interestingly, names in Greek, particularly if they go back to a certain spell that comes from the ancient Greek tradition, or is associated with Hellenic heritage, is associated, or if it is associated with the materia medica, for example. Sometimes Latin, if it is connected from through the Latin tradition, through the Franciscan tradition in Bosnia. You will find, in terms of the alphabets, also every now and then something written in Bosančica, in the Bosnian script. Lots of Hebrew names particularly from in the angelic realm. in the Islamic tradition, of course, we deal with the four archangels, but the names of other angels are not readily available. So in fact, they then in the occult, in the esoteric tradition, they come from the Hebrew Bible, from the tradition of the Hebrew tradition, Hebrew names. Then so you will have these, and then of course there is the language of magic.
The language of magic, yes.
There are magic formula.
Yeah.
Including the alphabet, the magic
including
alphabet.
the alphabet, yes.
Yeah.
There is a strong... my first thought was, of course, that, multiple languages requires or shows immediately that this is the realm of an expert, someone who can deal with different cultures, different languages, all that. It shows complexity, so not anyone can simply dig into it and do this. So that it serves maybe some kind of a protective, that is a little bit protective, that no one can simply take this and go to his kitchen and cook this, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, there is, I would say, yes, there is the question of authority or legitimacy,
yes,
and credibility, which is important to establish in these kinds of practices. There is the issue of knowledge in terms of, accumulative knowledge. And then also, I would say that what you point at is an important element, and you often have a twist in the recipe.
A twist. Okay.
Or a twist in the magic formula, or a twist in the magic square, where you don't complete the whole recipe at that moment.
Oh, wow.
For fear, one of somebody using it, readily available, and then anybody can use it.
Yes.
But so instead, you leave a certain element, you leave a number out.
The secret ingredient.
You leave the secret ingredient. You leave something out so that the spell is not complete as you write it in the manual.
Oh, wow. So that relies on
the practitioner, the one who
yes.
practices it, who actually uses it and translates it into a real ritual object, will complete it through that esoteric, unstated element, or will, sometimes, for example, I will find magic squares in which, magic squares are built. They're like Sudoku, built on the assumption that the numbers must conform both in terms of the rows and in terms of the columns, and sometimes you encounter mistakes in the calculation.
You encounter mistakes.
You encounter mistakes in these manuals, and I was like, why? How can they make such a basic mistake in the calculations? Right. Well, and then I was, as I've learned, both from sources and in conversations with people who work on these types of practices. Actually, sometimes it's done on purpose, so that.
Yes, it's a protection
thing, exactly. Yeah. Or you leave a number outside of a square, so you have a number is inside, and then right next to it there is a number, which is not put inside the square, so that when you put it when you are making when you make a talisman.
Which in itself testifies to what you said earlier, that it is about protection and health, and yes. Really that you don't want anyone to misuse this, that they don't want anyone to be exposed to harm. So it's always like do no harm.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. There is I must say that I am quite impressed at how careful all these manuals are in terms of indicating that that misuse of this can be harmful, and how much harm is harm. It's not. It doesn't even have to be intentional harm. I mean, if I know exactly how the recipe is and I think I can produce it, well, you don't want the you don't want the effect of it that suddenly you grow horns instead of having something else done. So in other words, it also can be unintentional, but it's still it doesn't bring the desired effect.
Yes. It's a little bit like, do not do this at home or something.
Do not
like
do
that.
this exactly. There are disclaimers. There are disclaimers
Yeah.
in all of these. Absolutely.
Yes.
Of course, if we try to look at all the grimoires that have been produced in the Islamic tradition, it would be impossible, of course, to not to encounter those that address the question of harm more explicitly, or even teach how to do it. The first big grimoire that we know of, that was produced in the Islamic lands, Ghayatul Hakim, or that was translated into Latin as Picatrix, and that became the most important source in Renaissance Europe for performing magic spells and magic tricks, and has remained one of the most important grimoires in the history of at least Western and Middle Eastern civilizations. That one is full of spells that are not necessarily just nice spells, kind spells. There are other types of spells, but that one is least. That one is kind of Sufi and pre-Ruhaniyat kind of manual. So there is a different type of logic or mechanism of spell production that operates there. The ones that I'm working with from the Ottoman period and the Ottoman Bosnia period, in fact, are much more clearly rooted in this idea that the Ruhaniyat, that the spiritual entities are the ones that govern the execution of spells, the efficacy of spells, the correctness of spells, and you want to evoke the proper correspondences,
Yes,
rather
proper
than, and you can do
intention.
that, exactly, and you can do that by following closely the recipe, but also by discovering, as it were. It's the process of unveiling. It's the process of discovering the true correspondence. So there is a certain esoteric knowledge that you need to have, religious knowledge, esoteric knowledge, batini knowledge, that not everybody has.
That's right. Oh, that's so fascinating. It's just such depth and richness to that, to how people have thought. It says a lot how people thought about themselves, how they placed themselves in their societies, how they worked with each other, how they looked upon each other. All that, all those things, which I suppose are, well, they're not necessarily explicitly said, but they're kind of implied in these practices. There's a lot of, in a sense, to kind of bring it to the kind of last question. I tend to connect love to storytelling, and it seems to me that there is no love without some sort of narrative, some kind of storytelling. What we tell ourselves about who we are in love, what love is, telling. So even these recipes, even these spells, they are like, they seem to me like narratives. And they say so much about like how we practically kind of approach love, what love is, without defining it rationally, like in a like in a treatise or something like that. But they really tease out what we really, what love really is for us. So I wonder if you could just say something about the notion of narrative and love. And in a sense, the ultimate spell for me is, I love you.
Nice. Yes,
that phrase that's the ultimate spell. That is the one which requires from you to respond, right?
Yes.
So when there is no response, then you want to like, well, the spell didn't work. Like she's not,
Yes.
right? Yes. And
Yes.
and that those magical words, right? So.
Yes, that's beautiful. Yes, yeah, I would say that yes, that each spell is, or each recipe is if I look at it modularly, it's a complex of, there is the visual, there is the magic, there is the narrative, there is the religious, there is the botanical. So it's, I would say, it's an interdisciplinary narrative, which you can, which you need to sort of start saying, okay, so I as a carrier of a talisman, or as a beneficiary of the talisman, I as a requester of the talisman, I as a patient, am asking from this authority who can write this, who can resolve this for me, I'm asking to do something with my feeling of sadness when I think of this and this person, or when I think of this cat, because there are some of them are towards the animal livestock and the animals in the household, and I worry about them or something. So what can I do? What can you do for me that I take care of this worry, that I know that this person or this entity or this.
I love my cat, but she doesn't love me back.
She doesn't love me back, or she's
indifferent to me.
I have one. There is a recipe which there is one situation where the spell is precisely about livestock. My livestock seems to be, they are not eating, and I don't know what I'm doing. Has the jinn come to them, or are they sick? What is it that I'm doing wrong? And I want them to be fine. I want them to be, and I worry about them. I can't sleep at night. So what do I do? So you, and then you unfold the talisman. Then you see, okay, so this is what you pray. This is what you. Talismans are really, as Tawfiq Anan, who worked, a Palestinian historian who worked a lot on worked on the spells in Palestine, says that the talismans are really just very intensified prayers. They're prayers really primarily, but they're intensified forms of prayer. So there is a sort of, you rely on the prayer, you rely on, you trust that that whatever is put in the talisman will bring the different elements of the story in a logical structure, so that the beneficiary, or the object of your desire, the object of your love, the object of your worry, will understand that story that you are, that story
Exactly.
will unfold in
Yes.
a way that will reach the object.
Place themselves or be placed correctly in that story.
In that relationship.
In
exactly.
that relationship,
So the kind
yes.
of relationship between you and your wife, or you and your lover, and you and your child, you and your future spouse, that the talisman will create a bond between you and them, and will actually, through unfolding of that story, or unfolding of those elements, or coming together of those elements, that there will be a successful outcome. So it is a way of relating to somebody, and it's a way of saying some things can be expressed, but some things cannot. Some things you have to have faith in. So it's part of that, again, the narrative, that something is unspoken, but that it creates the wow effect at the end, that, oh, it's good, it feels good kind of effect, which is sometimes it's not about words, it's about implications, it's about the unsaying, it's about the assumptions that are within, we are present there but are not expressed in narrative, explicit narrative terms. But the narrative, as we know, is not just about the words, it's about how the words are put together, how the interpretation as well. So yes, they do tell, and the other stories that they tell is the story of history, the story of people's lives, and you know, everyday anxieties and everyday aspirations and inspirations, and something that we don't read in history books. I mean, history books are not about this. History books are about, you know, whether it's social history or political history, are about how important people made things happen. Whereas this is about everybody. This is not just about important people, but the important people also use the talismans. It's about everyday individuals and everybody, how they express their anxieties, how they express their worries and their desires, and how they resolve them. So it's really the other side of history. It's this unhidden or this hidden history that that we don't always have easy access to. And those are the stories that we can capture from these kinds of sources, based on the topics in these spells. We see, in fact, the variety of human concerns.
That is so beautiful, Amila. Thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge, all this richness, all this. It just really warms my heart to hear this, and I think there's just so much that connects us that we can find in our common heritage, where we come from, and how we have interacted over the years, and find new ways of creating new intimacies and communicating. So thank you so much for this beautiful. Just this beautiful conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Adnan. I think that you're right. I mean, that we tend to look at the past without realizing how much in common we have with people who lived in the past, and people who, in fact, are part of our story, our history, our shared humanity, and how much their concerns are the concerns that we have still. I mean, there are some things, regardless of whether we can conquer the moon and then fly to Mars, and some things we still cannot resolve, and that is, why doesn't she love me back?
Exactly. Do I have to go back to the moon and find the secret ingredient?
And that is one of the spells that I have, and I can end on that note, is precisely saying, if you want a woman to love you more, then you do this, and then there is no rest of the recipe. So that's where it stops. And
that's where it stops.
So the manuscript stops there for some reason. It's lost, but it's lost in a very apt way. That's, you know, I still have to now to go and look for other manuscripts that will tell me that. So it's like the story of Shahrazad.
Yes. Oh, that's a beautiful one. The story continues. Yeah.
The story continues. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, and have a lovely evening.